you mentioned in your book how, especially in those times, specifically with like HBO specials, how you had the rights to basically show it wherever you wanted because you owned the rights to all these specials almost wholeheartedly. And obviously, recently there's the whole Chappelle situation with the Chappelle show that was also on Comedy Central and how he has been speaking out against, stuff like that. How do you see like throughout the years how things have changed, or do you think the whole ownership argument that's going on specifically in the creative world between the talent and then the suits, like how do you see that playing out in the whole Chappelle situation?
Well, I don't know how it'll play out with Chappelle. I've been following it a little bit, and is it true that Netflix took it off the air and said that
Netflix did take it off.
Oh, good for them. Actually, good for Dave Chappelle for getting them to do that. That.
I also think he's so much more important to them than just his old stuff that he's back producing so much new stuff. I think that he has more
Well,
leverage for sure,
you
obviously.
hit the nail on the head. It's about leverage. And the story that Dave Chappelle tells, where he walks in there, and I saw him tell the story online about, he was there and it was kind of like that. Everybody there said that they were, working with him and everything else, but in fact they weren't, and he really didn't understand fully what was going on when there was a clause in there that said that they owned his likeness and the name in perpetuity, which means forever.
Yeah.
Um, and then when he figured out what that was, he didn't, obviously didn't like it too much. But a couple of things. First of all, let's put Dave aside for a second. The cable industry partly became the cable industry because they were allowed to show things that came off network TV, like sitcom reruns and stuff, without paying any royalties. Because if you showed it again on the network in the summertime, you had to pay everybody all over again. That was the way they worked it. But if they went to something else, if they went to cable, you didn't have to pay the royalties. So what did that mean? It was cheaper. And so that was like a little bit responsible for getting the cable industry up and running. Yeah. And believe me, nobody liked that. The talent who had worked on those shows were like, wait a second, you can't just give this thing away. And the answer was, yeah, we can. That's what's going on. Thing number two, and I worked for comedy and I worked for several other channels. And I actually did some work for other channels on this specific topic of how do you pay the talent and who owns things. The cable channels, all of them, were, especially the ones that were successful, were known for just saying, you produce it, we own it. End of conversation. And if you said, no, I don't want you to own it, so they'd say, okay, who's next? It wasn't a negotiation, they wanted to own it lock, stock, and barrel. And one of the reasons is, and this is true of Comedy Central in the early days, and probably that was way after I was there, they wanted to be able to run the sprockets off it. They wanted to be able to repeat it. They wanted to be able to show it lots and lots, anywhere, use it in promotion, all kinds of stuff. So they didn't want to mess around with, we can play it 5 times. They wanted to play it forever. They wanted to own it.
And marathons became a huge thing for sure.
Marathons became a huge thing. So that's why that whole thing developed that way. Now, I will also point out that I was reading, this is a fun conversation. I don't know if people watching think it's fun, but I noticed the other day that it was the 50th anniversary of a Kinks song, the Kinks from England, that band. And they were interviewing Ray Davies, and he said, early on, we had a couple of hits, and they made a huge amount of money, and we didn't see any of it because we were taken in by the first guys we worked with. And I thought, man, this is like the oldest story in the book. Yeah. And the reason is, I think it was also, almost every band tells a similar story, and a lot of comics tell similar stories, and a lot of performers tell similar stories. Because you go in and what are you trying to do? You're trying to break in. And the network or the distributor or the record company, they're sitting there saying, okay, you want to break in? Bring it on. We own it, or we're taking most of it and you take a little of it. And you're young and excited and you say, okay, great. And again, this is not to blame Dave Chappelle for the mess he got himself in, but people do get themselves in exactly the same mess when they're starting out. It just happens over and over. I don't think I don't see how things could have been much different for Dave Chappelle. He tells the story of being turned down by HBO, and then he went to comedy, and they said yes, and I'm sure he was thrilled at the time. But then think about my story. I started Comedy Channel, which became Comedy Central. I had to talk people into it. I had to work my butt off in it. I did everything I could. It was personal to me for years and years. And then I got fired. And that was because they changed management. And I remember thinking to myself as I'm getting fired, and the guy who fired me said, it's not anything you did. Of course, your fingerprints are all over this place. You did great. You put it all together.
It was your idea. Like this was
your idea. Yeah. And I'm saying to myself, the hell do you have to do to get a job in this world? I started the whole channel. You'd think they'd keep me around for a while, right? But no. And that is the point. These people are not your friends. They're not your family, for the most part. I mean, I'm not going to say everybody in the industry is cold-hearted like this, and I think that I demonstrate that in my book, even at the ending. But, if somebody walks in and has a great idea, they will take it. Thank you for the great idea. That's the way it is. And similarly with Dave Chappelle's show, they said, terrific, we'll take it. People will continue to do this over and over. Yeah, I'm sure. And good for Dave Chappelle at this point, because he's got a lot of leverage.
Got a lot. Now. Yeah.
So he can get things redone sometime. But there's a lot of people who see stuff running out there that they don't want running, that they feel they can't do anything about. They lost the rights. It's out there. What am I going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we kind of mentioned earlier, like technology, I think is changing the dynamic a lot, because it's no longer like just 4 big gatekeepers. Now you can kind of make your own way a little bit, build your own crowd, and then you can bring that with you where you go, instead of having to only rely on these big pillars of entertainment that control the crowd, that control the audience, that control the entryway. So that's one good thing in the future, especially with entertainment, is that it is becoming a little bit more
democratized.
Democratized is the word for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yes, it is. But at the end of the day, a lot of the people who are doing these YouTube things, and some of them are making, a lot of money and have big audiences, granted. But, when they get a call from the network and somebody says, hey, we're going to put you on TV, you're going to have, a weekly audience of, millions.
Yeah.
And here's what we're going to pay you. That's like a good day. And so I point that out just because the big entertainment distribution companies, to the extent that they stick around forever, and maybe they will, maybe they won't. Well, there's new ones, Netflix and Amazon. Yeah. What do you think that's all about? Yeah. That's just cable channels all over again, or networks all over again.
Well, Netflix is having their own. They've had their own kind of things with comedians and how they feel like they've been underpaid for, specials and all this stuff. So they're kind of experiencing the same sort of thing.
Yeah, that's true. And again, I not to defend them, but looking at the fabulous history of the entertainment business in America, that's what happened starting in the 1920s. I mean, you don't have to look very hard to find stories of performers who were taken advantage of by the studios, by the networks, by anybody. And to a certain extent, at the time, if you go back and talk to these people, meaning the studios and the talent says, I was taken advantage of. The studio says, or the television network says, hey, we just saw an opportunity. Nobody knew this person, so we made a good deal. That's our perspective. Yeah. And they don't see it as kind of like the evil, anything evil about it. And to a certain extent, they made people's careers, even though those people weren't remunerated appropriately for whatever they were doing. So it's let me just say, it's complicated.
Yeah, it's
good for Dave Chappelle for becoming as famous and as powerful as he is, because he can go back and redress some of these things with the network, but most people can't. Most of that, and that's the way it is.
For every Dave, there's like a million others that either don't have that power anymore, or didn't even break through like they thought they would when they made the deal. So like you said, it's complicated.